There was a man named Daniel Whitmore. On the surface, Daniel had everything a person is told to want: a clean reputation, a polished smile, a job people respected. Neighbors called him the calm one, the guy who never lost his temper, the man who always had it together. But every night, after the house went quiet, Daniel would sit alone in the dark and feel something he could never explain to anyone: a pressure in his chest, a low and nameless dread, a heaviness that no promotion, no compliment, no achievement could ever lift. One evening he described it to an old friend like this: "It's like there's a room in my house I've kept locked for 30 years. I don't know what's inside it. I just know I've spent my whole life making sure the door never opens." Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that room inside yourself, that locked door you tiptoe past, hoping it stays shut? Because here is the truth that changed Daniel's life, and it may change yours today. Whatever you refuse to look at does not disappear. It waits, and in the dark, it grows stronger than you. Today we are placing the stamp of self-mastery on your mental framework. This is a free course. No fluff, no nonsense. A direct and deep dive into the most powerful concepts of Carl Jung's psychology, with one clear goal: to help you master your shadow and become emotionally unshakable. Stay with me until the very end, because what you avoid controls you, and by the time this video is finished, you will finally understand the mechanism that has been quietly running your life. Who this course is for. Who should watch until the end? Anyone facing anxiety, depression, guilt, anger, grief, or any form of psychological suffering. Those who already realize they are stuck repeating self-destructive patterns. Those who feel that no matter how hard they try, they cannot reach the emotional control they crave. Those who carry pains they cannot name, yet feel every single day. If that is you, then this content is for you. Throughout this video, you will clearly and practically understand what the shadow is. You will learn how it silently shapes your feelings, your thoughts, and your impulses. You will discover why so many of the emotions you cannot control, sudden outbursts of anger, waves of anxiety, unexplained sadness, chronic guilt, do not come from the world around you, but from unresolved conflicts inside you. And more importantly, you will learn how to face all of this, not with shallow positive thinking slogans, but with a real, deep, and transformative method built on over a century of depth psychology. This is not a video for passive consumption. Pause when you need to, take notes, go back and watch again. Each concept here can change the way you understand yourself and the way you deal with the world, but only if you apply it. It is not enough to watch. This is personal work. It takes courage, and yes, it will require discomfort. But on the other side of that discomfort is the emotional freedom you have been chasing your whole life. Think about it. You will learn why repressing the shadow sits at the root of so many psychological disorders. You will learn how the persona, the mask you show the world, quietly feeds your emotional fragility. You will learn how the archetypes of the collective unconscious show up in your ordinary day, and you will learn how to turn all of this knowledge into practical action. This is a complete course, a solid foundation for anyone who wants to begin or deepen the process Jung called individuation, the path he described as the true purpose of human life, to become who you are. So if you truly want to free yourself from the suffering that follows you, if you want to become the kind of person who can walk through the hardest emotions without being destroyed by them, you are in exactly the right place. Let's begin. Part 1. What the shadow really is. The shadow. That is the name Carl Gustav Jung gave to everything you reject, repress, or simply refuse to acknowledge in yourself. And this is where the real course begins, understanding what the shadow is and why it holds such devastating power over your emotional life. Imagine this. Since childhood you were taught, by parents, by school, by society, what is acceptable and what is not. You were praised when you were nice, polite, obedient. You were criticized or punished when you showed anger, envy, selfishness, or deep sadness, the impulses adults called ugly or wrong. And, like every child, you learned quickly, certain emotions have to be hidden, pushed into a dark corner of the psyche. That is how the shadow is born. Return to Daniel for a moment. When Daniel was 7, he cried at his grandfather's funeral, and a relative leaned down and hissed, "Men don't cry, pull yourself together." In that one instant, a small boy made a silent decision that would shape 3 decades of his life. Grief is dangerous, softness is weakness. Hide it. He did not lose that grief. He buried it alive. And what you bury alive does not die. Because here is the question few people ever ask: what happens to everything you repress? It does not vanish. On the contrary, it stays alive, growing in the unconscious, shaping your reactions, your thoughts, your feelings. The shadow is the sum of all these denied aspects of your personality. The dark side you do not want to see, but that inevitably acts upon you. Anxiety is often an indirect manifestation of the shadow. Depression, a build-up of unprocessed emotion trapped in the darkness of the psyche. Explosive anger, the cry of repressed parts that can no longer be ignored. Self-sabotage, an internal attack from the shadow itself against the conscious goals of the ego. The shadow is not evil in itself. It holds aspects that could, in fact, become sources of strength and creativity if integrated in a healthy way. But as long as it is not recognized, the shadow keeps operating on its own. And that is why so many people live trapped in cycles of emotional suffering they cannot explain. They feel overwhelmed by uncontrollable emotions, by self-destructive impulses, by patterns that repeat like an endless nightmare. And here is the truth few have the courage to face. You are not only the image you have built of yourself. You are not just your good side, your light side. You are also what you are most afraid to admit. And the more you run from it, the weaker you become. Integrating the shadow is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming whole. It is recognizing that anger, envy, fear, the hunger for control, all of it is part of the human experience, and only by bringing these parts into consciousness can you stop them from sabotaging your life from the dark. Let me ask you something before we go on. What is the one emotion you were taught early in life that you were never allowed to feel? I want you to sit with that for a second, because in the next part, you are going to see exactly how that buried emotion has been steering your decisions all along. If you think you are fully in control of your emotions, prepare for an uncomfortable revelation. Part 2. How the shadow secretly controls your emotions and decisions. Now that you understand what the shadow is, it is time to grasp how it touches your life far more directly than you imagine, especially in your emotions and your decisions. The shadow is not an abstract concept. It acts every single day, shaping feelings, impulses, and choices. Jung explained that as long as we do not make the unconscious conscious, it will keep directing our life, and we will call it fate. Read that again. What is not brought to consciousness continues to happen as fate. This is the key to understanding why so many of your emotions seem to slip out of your control. From a very early age, you were trained to repress certain feelings: anger, envy, fear, selfishness. You learned to conceal impulses that felt socially unacceptable. But what is repressed does not disappear. It stays alive, charged with emotional energy, acting autonomously through the shadow. When you feel an anxiety you cannot explain, you are often dealing with unrecognized shadow content. The same goes for disproportionate outbursts of anger, deep sadness with no obvious cause, and constant guilt. These are all signs that the shadow is in control. In Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung warned, repressed contents do not cease to exist. They become autonomous forces that can invade and dominate consciousness at any moment. That single sentence explains why so many emotional reactions seem to happen automatically. They are responses from unconscious complexes, fragments of the psyche acting under the command of the shadow. And it is not only your feelings. Your decisions are shaped by this too, repeating toxic patterns in relationships, sabotaging professional opportunities, adopting quietly self-deprecating attitudes. All of it is fueled by shadow content you have never integrated. As long as you believe you are in total control of your emotions and choices without first facing your shadow, you are living an illusion. Your shadow does not weaken because you ignore it. It grows stronger in the darkness. There is an ancient warning worth remembering here. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." Most people never dare to gaze into that abyss at all. So the abyss simply runs their life from behind the curtain. But there is a way out of this cycle, and it begins with awareness. Identifying the patterns of the shadow is the first step to reclaiming emotional control and becoming a resilient, whole person. There is, however, one fundamental obstacle that stops most people before they even begin: the persona, your social mask, built to please, to protect, to fit in. And it ends up reinforcing the very dominance of the shadow you are trying to escape. If this content is making sense to you, take 1 second right now and click the subscribe button. This channel exists to help you build the kind of mind that cannot be shaken, and I would love for you to walk this path with us. Thank you for your support. Now let's keep going. Part 3. The mask you wear is feeding the monster. To understand how the shadow keeps its grip on your life, you have to understand the role of the persona, the social mask you built to survive and adapt to the world. Jung described the persona as a system of adaptation or a relationship with the external world. In other words, it is the image you present in order to be accepted, respected, or loved. It is not who you truly are. It is who you learn to appear to be. Consider a woman named Grace Holloway. At work, Grace was flawless, always composed, always smiling, always the one who said, "I'm fine," with such conviction that no one questioned it. She had spent so many years polishing that image that she had come to believe it was the whole truth. But at night, the panic attacks came without warning. The more perfect the mask, the more violent the collapse behind it. Grace could not understand how someone so put together could feel so close to falling apart. The answer was simple and cruel. Everything she refused to show the world had to go somewhere. And it went straight into the shadow. Since childhood you noticed that certain behaviors earned approval while others led to punishment or rejection. Naturally, you learned to emphasize the pleasing parts and hide the rest. Over time, this adaptation hardens. You wear the persona like armor, an idealized version of yourself that you carry into relationships, work, and social life. But here lies the problem. Everything you repress to maintain that mask gets pushed into the shadow. The more rigid and perfect the persona, the more psychic material piles up in the darkness. That is why the people who seem the most controlled, always positive, always impeccable in public, so often struggle in private with deep anxiety, depression, explosive anger, or a suffocating emptiness. The price of sustaining an idealized persona is brutally high. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung warns that the persona is a compromise with society, but also a self-deception, as it distances us from what we truly are. The more you believe you are your persona, the more disconnected you become from your authentic self, and the more vulnerable you are to the manipulations of the shadow. This inner conflict produces constant emotional fatigue. You burn energy maintaining an artificial image, while the repressed parts of your psyche demand attention. It is a game that cannot be won. The shadow will always find a way to manifest, through physical symptoms, emotional crises, or impulsive behavior. The solution is to start dismantling the mask. Recognize that you are not the persona, you are a whole human being, with lights and shadows both. Integrating these aspects is the only way to reach real emotional freedom, and the first step is learning to identify the elements of your own shadow. Let me invite you to do something that will solidify this process. Write in the comments a truth you are tired of hiding, an opinion you are afraid to voice, a part of yourself that makes you feel isolated but that represents who you truly are. This is part of the journey, claiming your voice, showing your presence, and declaring that you will no longer bend to a mask that is quietly destroying you. Part 4. How to recognize your shadow in everyday life. Now that you understand how the shadow and the persona work together, it is time to take a crucial step, learning to recognize your shadow in daily life. Jung made it clear that the shadow reveals itself whenever we are dominated by intense and irrational emotion. In Ion, he writes, "The shadow appears in impulsive reactions, in lapses of behavior, in the projections we make onto others." You do not need to enter a cave to find your shadow. You only need to pay attention to your own daily reactions. Here are some practical examples. Imagine you feel a sudden, disproportionate hatred for someone at work. Something small, a comment, a gesture, triggers a rage even you consider exaggerated. That is a clear sign of projection. What you hate in that person is, in fact, a repressed part of yourself you refuse to accept. Or imagine you scornfully judge people who show emotional vulnerability, calling them weak or dramatic. Look deeper, and you may find that you have repressed your own sensitivity for years, terrified of being seen as weak. What you condemn in others is what you cannot tolerate in yourself. Think about it. Envying someone's success, feeling excessive guilt over small mistakes, bursts of jealousy, chronic procrastination, avoiding important confrontations. All of these can be expressions of the shadow. In Man and His Symbols, Jung and his collaborators emphasize that dreams are one of the most direct ways to access shadow content. Recurring dreams of losing control, being chased, confronting shadowy figures or aggressive animals. These usually mean repressed content is trying to surface. Pay attention to your body too. Chronic tension, unexplained pain, constant fatigue. These often reflect psychic energy blocked by the effort of keeping shadowy aspects out of consciousness. So the key to recognizing your shadow is honest self-observation. Ask yourself, what irrationally bothers me in others? What emotions dominate me against my will? What behaviors do I feel ashamed of after they happen? What parts of myself do I hide to protect my social image? This work takes courage. It is not comfortable to admit you carry anger, envy, fear, or even cruelty. But as long as you do not recognize these elements, they will keep controlling you. There is a line by the writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn that captures this perfectly. The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties, but right through every human heart. You are not the exception, neither am I, and that is not a curse. It is the beginning of freedom. Identifying the shadow, though, is only the start. The next step, and the hardest, is to consciously confront it. Part 5. The confrontation, where real transformation happens. Recognizing the shadow is an essential first step, but true transformation happens in the confrontation. Here Jung was categorical. There is no way to skip this stage if you wish to become a whole individual. In The Undiscovered Self, he warns that individuation is not achieved by denying the shadow, but by confronting it with courage. But what does it actually mean, in practice, to confront the shadow? First, it means accepting that this process is uncomfortable and unavoidable. You do not get to choose whether you will face your shadow. Your only choice is whether you will do it consciously or keep being manipulated by it. When you begin bringing these dark contents into the light, intense reactions arise: guilt, shame, fear, anger. Many people give up here and retreat back into the persona, but it is precisely at this moment that the real work begins. Let me tell you about a young man named Ethan Cole. Ethan came to a difficult realization. Every time a friend succeeded, he felt a hot, acidic envy he was ashamed of. His first instinct was to deny it. "I don't care about that." But one night he did something braver. Instead of denying the envy, he sat with it and asked it a question. "Where do you come from? What are you trying to show me?" And the answer nearly broke him open. The envy was not about his friends at all. It was about a dream he had abandoned years ago and never grieved. His envy was a messenger, pointing directly at the life he had been too afraid to live. That is the confrontation. When you feel envy toward colleagues who succeed, the true work is not to justify it or deny it, but to admit it without judgment and ask what it reveals about your own unacknowledged frustrations and desires. When you struggle to set boundaries, the confrontation reveals a deep fear of rejection and a repressed anger from being disrespected in the past. Facing that anger, accepting it as legitimate, is part of the process. During this confrontation, it is common to move through several phases. Denial, the impulse to rationalize or minimize the dark aspects. Resistance, the guilt and shame that arise when admitting unacceptable parts of yourself. Acceptance, the conscious recognition of these aspects as legitimate parts of the psyche. And integration, the gradual assimilation of these contents, reducing their autonomous power over you. Jung stressed that this journey is not linear. In Ion, he describes the confrontation with the shadow as a continuous process of assimilation which accompanies the whole of life. There is no single moment when you defeat the shadow. There is only a constant commitment to dialogue and integration. The practical tools for this work include dream analysis, reflective writing, Jungian psychotherapy, deep meditation, and above all, the sincere willingness to look at yourself with brutal honesty. But be aware, during the confrontation, new psychic elements emerge. Deep archetypes residing in the collective unconscious begin to manifest, and they play a crucial role in what comes next. Part 6. The archetypes that guide and test you. As you advance in confronting your shadow, something inevitable happens. Deep archetypes from the collective unconscious begin to emerge and influence your process. Jung devoted extensive study to these universal patterns of behavior and symbolic imagery. In The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, he states that archetypes are universal, inherited psychic systems that act as organizing structures of experience. During the confrontation with the shadow, 4 archetypes often manifest with particular strength: the anima, the animus, the self, and the trickster. Each plays a fundamental role, sometimes as a guide, sometimes as an obstacle. The anima and the animus. The anima, the unconscious feminine aspect in men, and the animus, the unconscious masculine aspect in women, act as intermediaries between the conscious and the unconscious. In the process of integrating the shadow, these archetypes frequently emerge in dreams, emotional projections, and relationships. A man in the process of individuation may begin to have recurring dreams of mysterious feminine figures, seductive, dangerous, or wise, inviting him to integrate repressed emotional aspects. The same happens for women with the animus, appearing as dominating or inspiring masculine figures. The self. The archetype of the self represents psychic totality, the organizing center of the psyche that transcends the ego. When the self emerges, there is usually a strong impulse to integrate internal polarities. But the self also confronts you with everything you have denied, demanding conscious balance. After months of shadow work, you may feel a new sense of inner unity and coherence, accompanied often by deep existential crises about purpose, values, and identity. That is the self in action, forcing an internal reorganization, the trickster. Perhaps the most treacherous archetype in this process is the trickster, the archetype of deception, chaos, and rule-breaking. On the path of individuation, the trickster tends to appear exactly when you believe you have overcome aspects of your shadow. It tests your ego, creating emotional traps and illusions of superiority. After a stretch of real progress, you might start thinking of yourself as more awakened or aware than everyone around you, and ironically fall into a new form of self-deception. That is the trickster at work, inflating the ego and hiding the true inner work behind a flattering disguise. In Ion, Jung emphasizes that archetypes are not contents of consciousness, but factors that organize and structure the psyche. Recognizing their presence and their role is crucial for navigating individuation with clarity. Integrating the shadow is neither linear nor simple. With every step, these archetypes emerge to guide you, test you, and transform you. Knowing how to identify them and how to dialogue with them is one of the most important skills you can ever develop. But why is it worth facing all of this? Because the result is a radical transformation in your emotional strength. Part 7. Why shadow work makes you emotionally unshakable. After everything you have seen, it is natural to ask, why go through the hard work of integrating the shadow? The answer is simple. Because the result is a profound transformation of your emotional intelligence and your ability to deal with life. Jung made this clear in The Undiscovered Self. No transformation of consciousness can occur without parts of the unconscious, primarily the shadow, being brought to light. In other words, you do not reach true emotional maturity until you face and integrate your shadow. Return one final time to Daniel Whitmore, the man from the locked basement. When Daniel finally opened that inner door, he did not find a monster. He found a grieving 7-year-old who had been told, at a funeral long ago, that men don't cry. He sat with that boy. He let himself feel, for the first time in 30 years, the grief he had buried alive. And something remarkable happened. The nameless dread that had haunted his nights began to lift, not because he defeated it, but because he finally listened to it. Daniel did not become weaker. He became unshakable. Imagine someone who spent their whole life battling outbursts of anger. After integrating the shadow, they do not become passive or indifferent. They begin to recognize anger as a legitimate emotion, learning to express it consciously and proportionately, which makes them stronger and more whole. Or picture a person with social anxiety who once avoided every gathering, paralyzed by an irrational fear of judgment. By integrating the shadow aspects tied to insecurity and the need for approval, they gradually expose themselves to those situations with a new self-confidence. These changes happen because when you integrate the shadow, you reclaim parts of the psyche that were dissociated. This releases psychic energy that was once consumed by repression. As a result, you become more authentic, acting in alignment with who you really are, instead of only maintaining a persona. You become more emotionally resilient because intense emotions no longer dominate you once you recognize them as legitimate parts of your being. You become less reactive because when you know your own triggers, you stop projecting onto others what is truly yours. And you become more whole, accepting yourself as a complete human being with lights and shadows, which generates a deep and rare inner peace. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung writes, "The acceptance of the dark side of oneself strengthens the individual as they begin to relate more honestly and consciously to life." People who reach this level of integration become emotionally unshakable, not because they stop feeling difficult emotions, but because they are no longer controlled by them. They carry a presence and stability that are rare in a world where most people are still running from their own shadow. Part 8. How to keep the shadow integrated every single day. Integrating the shadow is not a one-time event. There is no finish line where you get to say, "Okay, I'm done." Integration is a continuous process, and the real challenge is keeping that awareness alive in daily life. As Jung wrote in Psychology of the Unconscious, what is not brought to consciousness continues to happen as fate. So you must train your perception to catch the moments when shadow content tries to surface, in irritation, envy, fear, and self-sabotage. Here are concrete practices you can adopt. First, conscious internal dialogue. When you feel anger, envy, or shame, instead of repressing it, ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to show me about myself? Second, reflective writing. Set aside a few minutes each day to write about situations that provoked intense reactions, creating a safe space to examine your shadow and reduce its unconscious power. Third, dream analysis. Keep a dream journal and observe the recurring images, symbols, and characters that stir strong emotion. They are valuable signs of what the shadow wants to reveal. Fourth, mindfulness. Present moment awareness lets you observe your patterns without identifying with them, creating a space between impulse and reaction. Fifth, working with relationships. Whenever you feel strong dislike, blind admiration, or moral judgment towards someone, investigate whether it reveals something you do not accept in yourself. Sixth, healthy boundaries. Learning to say no protects you from the resentment that builds when you constantly violate yourself to please others. And seventh, a periodic review of the persona. Ask yourself what parts of you are hiding behind your current mask and what you are sacrificing to maintain a social image. Adopting these practices does not mean you will never again be caught off guard by shadow content. It means that when it happens, you will be prepared to face it consciously instead of being overwhelmed. With every cycle of awareness, the shadow's power over you shrinks and your emotional intelligence grows. But remember, the shadow is cunning. It adapts. It finds new ways to hide. That is why this work is a lifelong process. I want you to do something right now that will anchor everything you have learned. Drop this affirmation in the comments, word for word. I have the courage to face every part of myself, and I refuse to be controlled by what I once feared. Writing that is more than a comment. It is a declaration that you will no longer live at the mercy of your own hidden self. Part 9. The one-way path. What happens when you ignore your shadow? Mastering the shadow is a one-way path, and this needs to be absolutely clear. Once you begin bringing the dark aspects of your psyche into the light, the emotions you avoided, the thoughts you denied, the impulses you deemed unacceptable, you can no longer pretend you do not see them. The comfortable illusion that you are simply a being of light, a good person who has overcome their weaknesses, crumbles. And what rises in its place is not perfection, but something far more powerful. The truth of a whole human being, capable of recognizing their own shadow and, precisely because of that, more free. Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, the function of the shadow is to compensate for the one-sided attitude of consciousness. Its assimilation leads to a psychic balance that cannot be achieved by any other means. Without this work, you remain unbalanced, vulnerable to the unconscious impulses that sabotage your life. Ignoring the shadow comes at a very high price. You may keep living behind your persona, projecting your fears onto others, judging what you cannot accept in yourself, fleeing from uncomfortable emotions. But the cost is ongoing suffering, chronic anxiety, depression, compulsion, toxic relationship patterns. All of it thrives in the darkness of the unintegrated shadow. Those who face this process seriously experience a profound transformation. You become emotionally resilient, less manipulable by others and by your own emotions. You begin to act with authenticity and integrity. You gain an inner peace that does not depend on anyone's approval. You even learn to use the dark aspects of your psyche as sources of strength and creativity. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." The chaos you have been running from may be the very raw material of your greatness. And yet, do not be fooled. This does not mean that one day the work is simply finished. As Jung pointed out in Ion, the integration of the shadow is a process that accompanies the development of personality throughout life. New layers will emerge as you evolve, and the more you grow, the more capable you become of facing them with courage and maturity. This is not a path for the weak. It is for those who want to live consciously, those who prefer truth over comfort, who understand that emotional freedom is only possible when you accept all of your humanity and not just the part you would like to show the world. Closing, your commitment and your stamp. Machiavelli once wrote, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves." Shadow work makes you both. The fox that sees the traps hidden inside your own mind, and the lion that no longer fears what lives in the dark. Now I want you to make a commitment to this process. In the comments, write these words: "I am willing to face my shadow." Just that. Putting it into language is a symbolic and powerful first step, an affirmation of your intention to keep walking this path. And if this video touched you, if something inside you was awakened while you watched, do not stop here. The next video on this channel is just as important, perhaps even more so. It continues this journey and completes what you learned today. If you have made it this far, you already know you are not watching out of mere curiosity. You are here because something inside you has already begun to change. So keep going. You are not alone. You are simply ahead. And that, my friend, is frightening, but it is also liberating. The shadow does not disappear, but you can become greater than it. So let me ask you one final question before you go. Which stamp are you adding to your mindset today? Courage, wholeness, or self-mastery? Tell me in the comments. And when you do, remember what you now understand, that most people never will. The door you have been afraid to open your whole life was never hiding a monster. It was hiding you. Now move forward.